Dr. Andreas Krieg is a senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College in London and a fellow at the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies. Andreas Krieg, welcome to RM Breakfast.
Hi, good morning.
Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF had claimed mission accomplished repeatedly, claiming the IDF had destroyed 20 out of 24 battalions in the north, so that the remaining 4 were in Rafah. That's what we've been told. So why have they launched this new operation in the north?
Well, hard to say. I mean, obviously, the Israelis are pretending that this is some sort of conventional military operation where you strike battalions to destroy battalions and then you kind of win the war. When in reality, this is very much a population-centric operation. It's a counterinsurgency, essentially, which is supposed to be about dividing or driving a wedge between the civilian population and Hamas fighters. And thereby protecting civilians should be more important than actually killing Hamas, while Israel's effort has always been about killing Hamas. And the problem here has been that Hamas has been hiding. They've been avoiding open combat. They've been for 8 months underground, moving around in hundreds of miles of tunnels, and it has been near impossible for the Israelis to actually destroy them. And the problem here has been obviously that Hamas have waited, and they just moved back into space that the Israelis have declared cleared. And so basically you're in kind of a never-ending military operation because there is really a lack of political strategy of what Israel actually wants to achieve.
Well, a lack of two things, really, political and military strategy, wouldn't you say? If the military's job was to clear out Hamas, and we saw, week after week of reports of civilians killed as the IDF tried to destroy the tunnels where the Hamas had been using to hide in and to move around. If, as you say, Hamas have been just hiding in the tunnels to re-emerge now, that's we'll get to the politics, but that's a military failure too, isn't it?
No, because in the end of the day, the military is supposed to execute political strategy. Political strategy cannot be done by the military. And it was never clear how these tunnel systems would ever be destroyed. They probably cannot be destroyed because, again, hundreds of miles, they've tried to do partially. The problem is it's not for the military to do, it's actually for the politicians and for politics to actually demobilize the idea of Hamas, which was the underlying idea of violent resistance. And that is not something you can strike militarily. That's something you need to strike with a political strategy by offering Palestinians a political alternative. And
this was always the criticism from the very beginning, was that you can't really bomb your way through an insurgency. It's now, Benjamin Netanyahu, I think this is obviously highly significant, has been criticised by the IDF's chief of staff, Herschel Halavi. He's decried the lack of post-war planning and failure to develop a governing alternative in Gaza other than Hamas. So he's spoken out. He said as long as there isn't a diplomatic move to develop a governing body that isn't Hamas, we'll have to act again and again. Is that unexpected, that internal criticism so publicly?
Well, it's a new kind of level of criticism that we see internally coming from the IDF and security services, who've been really alienated with that Netanyahu government. For a while, that criticism was usually voiced internally, but now it's been made very public because the IDF realizes now, and it should have realized that earlier on, that you can't win this war without the government in Israel giving them a kind of tangible way out of this crisis, which has to be a political one. And Halevi is absolutely right in saying that if we don't offer an alternative to Hamas, the idea of armed resistance is just going to grow, because the more civilians you kill, the more people you'll radicalize, and the more people will pick up arms and fight Israel. So Israel will become less and less secure the more people Israel kills.
Well, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he's made similar comments to the IDF's chief of staff. He said that he's been working for many, many weeks, or the US has, on developing credible plans for security, for governments, for rebuilding. But none of that's been coming from Israel, that they've been working with Arab countries and others. And he says that, without such a plan, the end result will be, as we're seeing, Hamas coming back. It will be anarchy.
Absolutely right. But the Americans themselves could have put more pressure on Israel along the way to actually get the Israelis to agree to a mediated ceasefire. Qatar and Egypt have been playing quite a good game in the background, trying to get the Arabs around the flag, but also getting Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal. Then Israel pulled out in the last minute. So we're now in a situation where the Americans are kind of out of any innovative ways to come up with their own policy, because they have to really tell off their most closest ally in the region, Israel. and especially Netanyahu, to say and come to the negotiation table and find a solution. But even that would obviously not bring an end to the war. An end of the war requires a political solution. And there is absolutely nothing to be seen from either Washington or from Israel in terms of a tangible solution. The Arabs, the Gulf states in particular, Qatar, UAE, Saudi, they will not invest in rebuilding Gaza unless there is a political solution, and a political solution that will lead to a two-state solution eventually. And there's nothing the Americans can do about it, and the Americans are not really offering anything. So at the moment, we're in a vacuum when it comes to strategy.
Yeah, we're in a vacuum 8 months in. It's all a bit late, isn't it? I mean, what does a solution look like for Gaza? This question's been asked many times. I spoke to a former very senior Israeli general a few weeks ago who said the solution looks like neither Hamas nor Fatah. It looks like some kind of, territorial governments, territory by territory. What do you think a solution looks like?
A solution has to be one that is sustainable. And so anything less than Palestinian self-governance, whether this is a new governing body that the Arabs are working on, which is supposed to be decided upon by Fatah in the West Bank and some representation of Hamas as well, is not going to be a solution. And it's also one that the Arabs were unlikely going to support. And so the Israelis trying to govern themselves, or trying to raise an alternative UN force to govern or to basically provide security, is also not really a feasible solution, because again, it requires a way out. We can't go back to a pre-7th of October policy, which was an Israeli policy for a long time, to kind of mow the lawn, as they said. We'll let Hamas grow back and then fight back whenever they start firing rockets. That's clearly not a solution. So we need to have one which is leading to with clear stepping stones, a roadmap to a two-state solution.
And meanwhile, there's hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fleeing from the north again and from the south. These are people who have been displaced many times, most of them. Andreas Krieg, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Take care.
Dr. Andreas Krieg is a senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College in London and a fellow at the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies. You're listening to RN Breakfast.